second. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all good. All right, this is the second CoE lesson with the dual M and M. It's best than
Yeah.
M&M's. Favorite, a couple of my favorite people there in the community, Mike and Manuela. Thanks for doing this. I got a lot of feedback from the last lesson. I think I'll leave the questions that I got over the week for the very end of this lesson, so that I don't steal time from your presentation. And then we may have more questions, or maybe during the course of this lesson you answer some of the questions that people posted. But Mike, the floor is yours. Take it away, bro. Thanks.
Okay. Let's see if I got the right screen this time. Did I not get the right screen? I did not. Again, every time it does that to me. Let me back here and unshare and then share again. I'm going to share this screen this time. And I will let, I'm going to let Manuela kick it off, but I'm going to, how's that look?
That
You
looks
guys
great.
see? All right, perfect. All right.
Yeah,
Take it
hi.
away, Manuel.
Okay. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself first, or should I go first?
Sure. So I'm Mike Ochs. I am I'm a vendor with PowerCat. I've been with PowerCat team at Microsoft for close to 2 years now. And I primarily focus on the ALM accelerator, which is part of the CoE starter kit that we're going to talk about today. And Manuela, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm also part of the PowerCat team, and I primarily own the CoE starter kit. So yeah, if you go to the next slide, please. So in the session last week, we really talked a lot about kind of the features and components of the CoE starter kit, and had provided kind of an overview of kind of what's in the kit and where to find documentation. Today in the deep dive, we'll dive into kind of the architecture, what it takes to set it up, what it takes to kind of configure the kit, and then also like we'll talk about kind of how to upgrade and extend the kit, and then Mike will talk about how we develop the kit internally, kind of from the perspective of, you know, they're quite complex solutions, like what are some of the lessons that we've learned, and how do we release and support the kit as well. So it's much less about kind of the features of the kit and kind of more what's going on in the background. Yeah, next slide, please. That one is just a recap from kind of what we learned last week. So yeah, last week we talked about kind of how the CoE starter kit itself is, we consider it a templatized implementation of best practices. It really contains everything that we've learned from customers when they're establishing or when they're rolling out Power Platform adoption across their tenant. Everything that's in the kit, we have customers that are using it or that have inspired us to develop it. If you go to the next slide. I really hope I got the animations on the slides right as well, because otherwise it might not make sense. Yeah, I think if you click next kind of a couple of times. So yeah, last week we talked kind of about how the kit addresses 3 different personas, like the admin persona, the maker persona, and the everyone persona. And we looked at some of the applications, dashboards, and flows that are in the kit that address the needs of these different personas. And in order for those needs to be addressed, it's really important that everything that the CoE kit does is based on having knowledge about the inventory, telemetry and organization data in your tenant. And by that we mean that the CoE kit knows about all of the apps that exist in all of your different environments. It knows about all of the makers that exist across all of your environments and what they've made. And then kind of by connecting to the audit log, it knows about how these applications are used, by whom they are used, and then by connecting to the Office 365 users connector, it knows where are those makers from, what department are they in, are they even still in the organization, or have they left since? So kind of the heart of the CoE kit and everything that the CoE kit does is built on knowing where what's going on in your tenant. Next slide, please. Today, the way that the CoE kit knows about everything that's in your tenant is by using cloud flows. They crawl the tenant on a daily basis to retrieve environments, apps, flows, everything kind of that's there. It's using the out-of-the-box connectors for that. So the Power Platform for Admins connector, the Power Apps for Admins connector, and we've built the kit kind of on top of those connectors. And then the inventory is stored in Dataverse, and then all of the apps and flows and the dashboard in the kit are then connecting to the Dataverse instance to do everything. There are so the CoE kit has been around for about little over 3 years, I think. In the beginning, this was a really good approach. Most of our customers had maybe a few hundred applications, a few hundred flows, and maybe tens of makers. As adoption across our organizations across our customers has grown, those flows have, increasingly run into scalability issues. We're now looking at customers that have tens of thousands of apps and tens of thousands of flows and sometimes even more. And kind of doing that inventory with cloud flows was maybe the best kind of option that we had when we developed the kit. But now, now we're looking at sometimes having scalability and throttling issues with customers that are very large. So that brings me to the next slide. There is a relatively new feature available in the product. It's available in the Power Platform Admin Center, and it's called data export, and we sometimes refer to it as self-serve analytics. It's completely kind of unrelated from the CoE Starter Kit. You're able to set up a data export, and that exports your inventory and usage data to your own Azure storage account. And it's available today for Canvas and model-driven apps and Power Automate cloud flows. And kind of once you set that up, you can obviously kind of leverage the data yourself, build your own reporting on top of it. But as part of our roadmap, next slide, please. We're also taking the approach to use that data and build this kind of rebuild or re-architect the CoE Starter Kit on top of that data. And for that, we're going to use Power BI and Power Platform data flows. There's obviously like multiple benefits to this architecture. Performance is one thing. We no longer have to kind of crawl the inventory on it, like crawl your tenant on a daily basis to understand what environments are new and are there any apps that have been modified. The data is just there. So performance is much improved. We also think that it will improve kind of the trust in data because it is provided by Microsoft from the Power Platform Admin Center, and it's no longer kind of meshed together by like 50 cloud flows that are responsible for that inventory today. And obviously kind of scale is another big benefit there, where the data will just be in the data lake and we're no longer kind of limited by Power Automate throttling caps, etc. Additional to that, there's also data points that we don't have today using kind of the Cloudflow methodology or architecture that is available via the data export architecture, and that's Cloudflow usage. So like flow runs, how often those flows are running, how often they're failing. And then model-driven app usage data we don't have today in the kit. And that's something that customers are really looking for. So with the new architecture, we will have model-driven app usage data available. So kind of coming soon, hopefully in the next couple of months, we will release a version of the kit that works with the data export feature. That will not mean that that's the architecture that you have to pick. We'll continue to support the kind of current architecture with the cloud flows, but we'll definitely recommend and encourage customers to use the data export feature instead of the cloud flows, just for because of the benefits listed on this page. But yeah, as part of our roadmap, the kind of really the foundation of the kit at the moment is changing quite a bit, and there's a lot of effort going into that. Next slide, please. If you look at the CoE Starter Kit kind of all up, it consists of different solutions. So from a CoE kit perspective, we've got the core component solution, which is our base layer, I would say. And then the audit log, governance, and nurture components depend on that. So you can't install the governance components if you don't have core installed. Like the kind of dark blue layer at the top can't be used without core. But then we do have components that can be used completely standalone, like the innovation backlog, the admin task planner, and the theming solution. So they can be installed standalone. They don't have the same kind of prerequisites as core, and you can explore them on your own. And I've kind of shaded it out a little bit. At the moment, the CoE kit doesn't take a dependency on the creator kit, but in either the next or the December release, we will start using creator kit components. So there will then be kind of a dependency on like of our kit to have the creator kit installed. And that is true today already for the ALM accelerator. With the last release of the ALM accelerator, they've started using the creator kit components to kind of unify the look and feel of the application. Of the setup experience application. So that is kind of already true for the ALM solution, and the rest of the components are playing catch up a little bit there. Next slide, please. So if you look at the kind of setup of the kit, we have a couple of prerequisites, and those are primarily true for the core component solution. And the first one is true for all of our solutions. You need to have a Power Platform environment with Dataverse capacity. All of our solutions use Dataverse, so that is a prerequisite there. For the core components itself, they should be installed with an account, and that can be like a named account or a service account that does have the Power Platform service admin role. Because of the connectors that we use, we need the role that installs the kit needs to have access to all of the environments and all of the data in your tenant, and that's typically the Power Platform admin role, or Dynamics admin role would work as well. We use email and Teams, so you need to have a Microsoft 365 license for the account so that they can send emails and post adaptive cards to Teams. And then because of we're using premium connectors such as Dataverse, but also the HTTP for Azure AD connector. So that requires then a Power Apps per user license and a Power Automate per user license as well. And they can't be trial licenses due to some of the pagination limits that a trial license has. And then this is sort of optional, but if at the moment, if you'd like to collect telemetry information, so get kind of information on how often an app is launched and how many unique users an app has, you have to be granted access to the audit log as well. And that has to be like either a global admin or Exchange admin that can give you access to that. The Power Platform admin role kind of out of the box doesn't give you access to the audit log. I'll pop it in the chat window as well, but all of our prerequisites are explained in detail in our documentation as well. So that's always kind of the best source of truth. Next slide, please. So once you kind of, I guess you start by importing the solution. As part of that, you set up the connections that are needed, and you then we use environment variables to store actually quite a lot of information that then influences how our flows run or where information is sent to. So some things like email addresses for your admin are stored in an environment variable, or like groups, for example, are all stored in environment variables. So you kind of during import, you'll have to configure that. And then based on our, you would then kind of go through our documentation and a lot, as I said, kind of at the beginning, at the moment, the inventory is mainly controlled with cloud flows. So you would then turn on first some child flows, then some configuration setup flows, and then the inventory flows, and you'll wait for them to kind of finish running. And then you'll look at the Power BI dashboard and the applications that are part of the kit and share them with other admins and kind of look kind of through our documentation to explore what to use. The setup experience is, especially kind of the core components, is definitely one of the like frequent downfalls when you're looking at the kit. It is quite complex, just because of kind of the complexity involved with gathering that inventory at the moment. So we have recorded a video that's about 40 minutes long that walks you step by step through the setup, and you can follow that along. But we've got something even better coming on our roadmap. That's on the next slide. And sorry, I've got a bit of an animation there. So what we're working on at the moment is a setup wizard. So that will be an app that you launch after you import the solution that will take you step by step through all of the required steps to set up the kit. So if you could click kind of next to get the animation, to get some of the pop-ups going one more time. Yeah. So kind of as you launch the app, it will check for that the prerequisites are to install the kit are fulfilled. So we'll check that you've got the right licenses. Next, please. You'll then, as part of kind of setting up the kit, you configure methods to communicate with other admins, with makers, and with user personas. At the moment, that involves going to the Azure portal, fetching an ID or an email address, and putting that into an environment variable. Now with the application that we're developing, you'll be able to do that kind of from, like, you don't have to leave the context of the application. You can select an existing group, or you can create a new group, everything kind of inline from the application there. Next, please. All of the flows are then kicked off kind of within the application, and you'll be like prompted to wait until they finish running. So there'll be like a progress bar indicating that some of the background processes are still working, and you'll only be able to click next when these are done. At the moment, you kind of have to start those flows manually and then refresh until they've finished running, kind of manually check for that, and then and then kind of continue there. And I think there's one more. Yeah, next. One more next. And then at the end, the CoE kit consists of a lot of applications that have to be either shared with your other, like your fellow admins, or with maker personas. For example, the environment request application that we looked at last week. And then kind of at the end of the setup, you're prompted to share all of those applications with the correct personas. You can either do that one by one, or you can choose to share all the applications, and then we kind of share them with the groups that you've set up in the first step under communication methods, to share them all out. So it's meant to be kind of a guided experience through the setup that doesn't take away too much information, so you'll still know exactly kind of what's going on and what part of, like, what the kit is kind of doing, but it's just guiding you through all of the steps, so you don't have to you don't have to do that yourself. Can you click next twice, please? Sorry, I don't think we've got time for that. So I'll go sorry, to the upgrade the CoE kit. There we go. Thank you. So I think we talked about it last week. So we released the CoE kit on a monthly basis. So every month a new version comes out, and that that adds kind of bug fixes or new features. And we do recommend upgrading at least every 3 months. So definitely subscribe to our release notes on GitHub, so you get an email when a new release goes out, and you can kind of review what's in the release. The reason we say every 3 months is not because of a product limitation, but because we're a really small team, and we are only able to test kind of upgrades for 3 months back. So as part of our release process, we test a new install, make sure that works, and then we upgrade kind of the past 3 months back. And if that works, then we will ship it. So if there's anything kind of further back, we don't test it, and then we're kind of unable to advise on it if there are any issues. And kind of issues could be like dependency issues or things that we've removed from the kit, or things like that. Even if you're not making any customizations, so the kit, we do recommend having a test and prod environment and having a test strategy. We're obviously we try to ship high quality, but nothing and no one is perfect. So there might be bugs that we introduce with a new version. So we do kind of recommend having a test strategy to make sure that you import something into a test environment, make sure everything is still working, and then move it to the prod environment. If you are making customizations, then we would obviously recommend that you have a dev test and prod environment with your changes and move those through. And as part of the upgrade, we have an app called the Admin Command Center that helps you check if there's any unmanaged layers on any of the flows. We'll talk a little bit about some of that in the next slides, but basically, if you have unintentional unmanaged layers, you can remove them from there, and you can kind of check to see if there are any unmanaged layers where you don't expect them. That can happen if you, or very often it happens when customers kind of look at the flow, they select edit because they want to kind of see what the flow is doing, and they don't know that then creates an unmanaged layer. And as soon as you have an unmanaged layer during an upgrade, the upgrade doesn't take for that layer, and the unmanaged layer takes precedence there. So you wouldn't kind of receive our upgrades there. Obviously, that could be intentional. Like you might have modified a flow because the process that we had didn't work for you, and then you could obviously decide to keep your layers there. But yeah, in the application, you'll be able to check for that and remove them there. Next slide, please. Something that we often kind of discuss with our customers is how to extend the kit, and also why it's called starter kit. And it's very, like, the naming here, very intentional. There's no one size fits all when it comes to Power Platform adoption and governance, and a lot of the tooling approach will depend on the processes that you have in place. Kind of going from, like, are you very centralized or decentralized? How many people are responsible for that process, to kind of, maybe you already have existing IT service management processes in place that your Power Platform adoption needs to fit in. So yeah, there could be kind of many reasons for why you would want to extend and customize the CoE kit, like capturing additional metadata, modifying apps and flows to fit your existing process. I know some of our customers. So at the moment, we have a process that identifies applications where the maker has left the organization, and if they have, we send a notification to their previous manager to say, can you please take care of that? Many of our organizations actually have kind of maker mentors in place, or sometimes they call it cohorts, where it's basically kind of a person that's responsible for a couple of makers that and they mentor them, and they want those notifications to go to the mentor instead of the line manager. So they've kind of modified the process to pull information from wherever they're keeping those mentors, and sending the notification there instead. So that's kind of a simple example of why you would want to modify the kit. Sometimes some of our applications are kind of maker facing or end user facing, like the app catalog, and there are some of the customers we work with have extended that with their organization brand, so kind of updated the colors, the logo, the look and feel, the fonts, etc., to really make the application shine with kind of their brand and their theme. So that's something that happens a lot. And then some of our customers, really use the inventory that we've talked about and build additional apps and flows on top of that inventory for their own like support processes and compliance processes as well. So those are some of the reasons on why you would want to extend the kit. And then in the next slide, we'll talk about what our recommendations are. So kind of overall, the recommendation is that you have a development environment where you install our solution as managed, and then you create an unmanaged solution with your customizations, your apps, and your flows, and then you kind of move those through your test and production systems. There are, I guess, some nuances there. So tables and model-driven app support merging. So it's like kind of relatively easy to extend those parts in your unmanaged solution. For Canvas apps and Cloud Flows, they do not support merging. So basically, the only way you can extend them is by creating a copy in your own unmanaged solution there and making changes there. And then you're no longer kind of able to receive our upgrades anymore. Typically, that's a very kind of conscious decision that you make. So like that Canvas app as it is today doesn't fit my purpose. I'm going to take a copy of it and make it fit. We don't recommend changing the cloud flows that are responsible for that inventory gathering that I talked about in the beginning. We frequently, those are kind of the flows that change most often, like we gather additional data, we improve performance, we fix bugs. So if there's anything in those flows that doesn't look quite right to you, we recommend raising an issue with us on GitHub, and then we'll talk through that, and most likely we'll kind of address that in an upcoming release. But kind of don't take the bug fixing of those cloud flows that sync the inventory upon yourself. Like we're definitely invested there. And then for the Power BI dashboard, that also doesn't support merging. So we recommend creating your own Power BI dashboard based on our data, and then publish it to the same Power BI workspace as kind of the out-of-the-box dashboard. And then you like your end users that consume those dashboards can kind of switch around between the two of them in the same workspace and have a really good user experience there. We also kind of extend the Power BI dashboard quite frequently with new pages, new filters, etc. So if you do kind of make your own changes there, that you then can't merge it with our new version, and it can be a little bit kind of frustrating. So we always recommend kind of having your own dashboard there if needed. Next slide, please. This is a little bit more kind of behind the scenes, I guess. So the CoE Starter Kit is like a fairly complex solution. We've got now in total, we've got nine solution packages. Some of them have dependencies on core, some of them have dependencies on the Creator Kit. So the way we develop it is we have a dedicated environment for each of the development solutions, where the solution itself is installed as unmanaged and any dependencies are installed as managed. That's really best practice to avoid dependency conflicts, or taking a dependency on something that's unmanaged itself. And that's definitely a lesson that we learned the hard way. So yeah, we have quite a number of environments that we manage in the team. We, as we discussed last week, everything that we do, like bugs, issues, feature asks, is triaged on GitHub. So we do have kind of a daily, I call it stand-up. Some of our teams have like stand-up meetings. In the CoE kit, it's more a Teams chat, but we do have kind of a daily chat to see to decide who's working on what, divide up the work there, and then we've got a shared environment for build, validation, test, and production, where we do all of our quality testing and kind of release and upgrade testing. And for the deployment, we use the ALM accelerator there. So yes, not much that's done manually. All of the deployment is done in the ALM accelerator. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mike.
Thanks, Manuela. Yep. Yeah. So we're all part of the same team. So the ALM Accelerator is a part of the CoE Starter Kit, and we're kind of, I guess, we're all a part of the same product. But the ALM Accelerator team actually works a little separate from the CoE Starter Kit team. So Manuela and her team works on the CoE Starter Kit components primarily, and then myself and Mark, who's on the call, and our team work on the ALM Accelerator. And the ALM Accelerator, and I mentioned this last week, was built specifically to manage ALM, application lifecycle management, for the CoE Starter Kit. So having, what did you say, 10 solutions, being able to deploy those on a monthly basis, and having release notes and closing out issues associated with those releases, as a manual task, that was a bit too much to have to do manually, and the ALM accelerator was built specifically to help release the CoE starter kit. And then we folded the ALM accelerator into the CoE starter kit. We've released it as an open source project along with the CoE starter kit. And now we've got this sort of inception thing going where we actually use the ALM accelerator to release the CoE starter kit. We also use it to release the ALM accelerator. But if you weren't on the call last week, the ALM accelerator is effectively what drives our release process with the CoE starter kit. So the ability to source control solutions, the ability to package up those source controlled solutions and deploy them into downstream environments, the ability to create releases in GitHub on a monthly basis, all of that is handled by the ALM accelerator. And this, since this was a deep dive kind of topic into the CoE starter kit, I followed, Manuela's lead on, let's talk about like some of the architecture, right? Like we talked about how it works last week. And if you weren't on the call last week, then please go back and kind of watch that so that you understand how it works on the front end, how users interact with it. But this is more of a, how does this thing actually, how is it built, right? Like how does it function? And I, took some inspiration from Manuela's slides to discuss the architecture behind the ALM accelerator. So on the right side of this slide, everything pretty much from this middle line to the right can be taken by an organization and can be used without anything from the left side of that line. So we've decoupled, basically, we have an app that a user can interact with, and I can go into that app and I can say, I'm going to commit a solution, I want to deploy a solution, I want to import a solution, I want to delete a solution. All of those things we kind of went through last week. And that app provides some functionality that makes sort of easy button layer over what is effectively these pipelines on the right-hand side. All of the functionality of the ALM accelerator, or the majority of the functionality of the ALM accelerator, is built into these pipelines in Azure DevOps. So it starts with, on the left side, right? It starts with a maker creating a solution. It could be Manuela building out a CoE starter kit solution. It could be somebody in your organization building out a productivity app, whatever it may be. Ultimately, they want to be able to take that thing. They may or may not, depending on the functionality of that app, it may vary, right? Like, so you may have a personal productivity app that you use for just yourself. You don't have any plans to share it, but you've automated some process that you do on a daily basis internally in your company, and you just use it for yourself. You probably don't need ALM. If you've built an app that could be used by other people within your organization, now all of a sudden you're in a situation where I need to share this, right? Like I need to put a process in place for me to be able to take this app and push it into an environment where other people can use it. And that's what the ALM accelerator is intended to do. So makers are building apps on the left side of the screen. Ultimately, they want to take that app and they want to push it to another environment, but they also want to potentially source control it or take a snapshot of that solution at that point in time so that they can go back in the history and they can always see, what's changed over time. You don't necessarily have that capability within the Maker Studio, right? Like you can roll back apps. Flows don't have that sort of version history, but if you put all of your components into a solution, you can export those things, you can unpack those things into a human readable fashion, and you can put those into a source control system where people can actually see the history of what's changed over time. So the app helps you to do that. It helps you to export and unpack, but it also helps you to configure things in a downstream environment. So I've got an app, for example, we have a sample app that we showed last week. It's got a custom connector on it. It's got flows. It's got a Canvas app. It's got a model-driven app. It's got all of these components of the Power Platform in a solution, and I want to be able to take those things, I want to move them into a downstream environment. Well, there's a lot of dependencies that go along with that. Environment variables, for example, right? Like environment variables are environment specific. Connection references are environment specific. Who I want to share that Canvas app with is environment specific potentially, right? So I want to push it into a test environment. I want these people to be able to test it. When I push it into a production environment, I want another group of people to be able to use it in production. The Canvas app provides that ability to configure all of that stuff ahead of time, so that when you deploy it, it's sort of a no-touch deployment. Everything's working in the downstream environment, everything's shared with the right people, and it can be used. So the Canvas app uses connectors, it uses flows to reach into those downstream environments to configure all of that stuff. None of that is necessarily required in order to use the pipelines, which the pipelines kind of take in all of that information and use that to deploy. But obviously the app provides that sort of easy button layer, the UX interface, that non sort of context switching interface where, you know, a maker, you know, who's working in the Maker Studio can just go to a Canvas app. It feels familiar. They can configure their solution prior to deploying it, and and basically we built all of that on the Power Platform. So we're not using any secret APIs that the platform exposes for us because Microsoft has given us access to those. We're using all of the out-of-the-box sort of connectors and such, and flows and things like that to build this. So that's essentially what the app portion does for you, right? It gives you that more of a click button kind of easy button interface over top of these Azure DevOps pipelines, which is in this kind of third swim line. It gives you that ability to kind of configure your solution and send it off to a pipeline in Azure DevOps to do some magic, right? So export, unpack, deploy, etc. Our pipelines, like I said, are our, that's the heart of the ALM accelerator. They're composed of Azure DevOps extensions, specifically the Power Platform extension, dev tools that are available in the marketplace. They're composed of some PowerShell, which is the second icon here, and there's a little bit of code in there. So not entirely no code, low code, YAML. Our pipelines consist of YAML and PowerShell primarily. YAML is just a language that Azure DevOps uses, that GitHub uses to describe a pipeline or a workflow, as it's called in GitHub. But we use YAML, PowerShell primarily. A little bit of high code. We've got some dependencies on on some C# libraries and things like that. But for the most part, this third swim line is more of the high code area, right? This is all low code. This is all PowerFX and connectors, etc. When you get down to the pipelines, this is a bit more of a code first sort of environment, and that's just the way that Azure DevOps operates, and it's also the way that GitHub workflows operate. So as of right now, we don't have support for GitHub workflows. Our goal is to get there and to support that as well. We use the ALM Accelerator internally to source control into GitHub. We source control via Azure DevOps pipelines. So despite the fact that we're pushing into a GitHub repo, we're actually using Azure DevOps pipelines to run our internal releases. But again, just to call out, there's a separation right here between the second two swim lanes and the first two swim lanes, where you could absolutely take our pipelines and you could use them without the need to use the app. So we've consciously made a decision to separate those so that, at a future point where the front end isn't necessary, we can split off the front end from the back end of this process, of this architecture. So then the fourth swim lane is effectively those pipelines. Like I said, they will push your solution into Git. You'll make another gesture either over here in the second swim lane, or you'll make a gesture in this third swim lane, and you'll say, I'm ready to deploy. And the deployment is a solution. Everything has to be in a solution. To use the ALM accelerator, to use ALM in the platform all up going forward, everything has to be in a solution, which means you have to have Dataverse in your development environment and all of your downstream environments. But ultimately, we will take what's in source control and we will package that up and we will push it into a Dataverse environment downstream. And this shows 3 environments. It could be 5 environments. It could be 1 environment. It could be 2, whatever. But the idea is that source control in this case is the source of truth for what the solution is. And the idea behind that is you can have makers, individual sort of low code makers working in the Maker Studio, building flows, building apps, creating tables, but you can also have pro code developers building plugins, building PCF controls, building code first components, and they can work in sort of the environment that they're familiar with, which is that Git environment, and they can commit their changes into Git. That stuff gets built up and it gets deployed, and everybody can kind of work in a fusion team sort of environment. So setup prerequisites, these are similar and almost identical to the prerequisites that are in place for the CoE starter kit. The one thing that we have a requirement on is you need to have an Azure AD app registration, which is commonly referred to as a service principal. And that service principal needs to have specific permissions. It needs to have permissions to talk to it's actually, I think the permission is Dynamics CRM, but it's basically to be able to talk to Dataverse. It needs to be able to talk to Azure DevOps. It needs to be able to talk to Power Apps Advisor, which is specifically used for solution checker. So when you export a solution and it builds that solution, it will run solution checker against it, and it will report back to you anything that fails from the solution checker perspective. It needs to have a very specific permission, which is Power App Management permissions. And this is the one that sometimes people get caught up on. It's a specific permission that kind of gives God rights to the service principal. And we're working with the product team to eliminate this requirement because it's used for very this permission is used for very specific things within our pipelines that don't necessarily need that sort of God mode sort of permissions, but as of right now, they do. And these app registrations can be split up. We're working on some documentation to describe how they would be split up, but effectively an app registration that can connect to Dataverse from Azure DevOps, but also a app registration that can connect from Dataverse to Azure DevOps. So going both directions, right? So you've got the app, which is communicating with Azure DevOps to say, hey, run this pipeline to export this thing, run this pipeline to deploy this thing. And then ultimately that pipeline runs and there's a service connection in Azure DevOps that communicates back into Dataverse to get the solution, et cetera, et cetera. So this is all described in our documentation. There's a QR code that kind of that you can scan there that describes it a little bit better than I think I just did. But these are basically the prerequisites for setting up the ALM accelerator. Similarly, again, to the CoE starter kit, our setup now is much simpler than it used to be. We used to have about a 30-page document on how to set up the ALM accelerator. We were able to get that down to like, I don't know, 10 pages by creating a CLI. We created a command line interface to do the setup. And then as of 2 months ago, we actually created a setup wizard, which I'm going to show you, that gets that sort of process down to a much more usable way of setting this up. So there are additional steps that are required after you run the project setup wizard. There are some pre-steps that you need to run as well. So you do need to create that service principal in AAD. After the fact, you need to do a little bit of setup in the app to set up your solutions, but the project wizard actually makes this a lot more of a smoother process. So I'm going to show that right now. And let me know if you can see my browser. Can you guys see my browser, or you still see the slides?
Yeah, we can see it.
You can see the browser? You can see the app?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. All right, so let's assume that I've created an app registration. Let's assume that I've installed the solution, right? Like those would be the 2 steps or the prerequisites. And then once I've installed the app, actually I don't think I listed that on that slide, but you would have to update the custom connector. That's also in our documentation. I didn't list it in the slide, but you do need to update the security on the custom connector. We're working through that to get that to be more automagical. But let's assume we've done all of that, and now we just want to get started with the ALM accelerator. So the ALM accelerator is an app that communicates with Azure DevOps, and it communicates specifically with a project and an organization within Azure DevOps. And this is the new project wizard. So I can say, you know what, I'm going to create a new project wizard, or create a new project via the project wizard. I'm going to call this 0 to hero. I'm going to give it a description. A test project, for example, or I can select an existing one. I'm going to create a new project in this case, and this is going to create a new project in Azure DevOps. Click Next. Give it a second. There we go. It's going to ask me to install our templates. These are our pipeline templates, our YAML files that I described earlier that live in our accelerator repo. Yep, that looks good. I'm going to install it into a repo called this. Click Next. And then I need to add service connections. So I need to add environments essentially that I'm going to be working with. So in this case, I'm going to work with, let's see, I'm going to be working with the, where'd it go? Oh, well, I can't seem to find it here. I logged in as, okay. So I'm going to work with, for example, let's say this build validation environment. I've got this environment, this environment, this environment, right? These are my validation environment. These are my downstream environments, test, prod, and then this is my development environment or my maker environment, for example. All right, that looks good. I'll add those there, and then I need to supply the app registration information. So I'll do that over here on a different screen. Right. bring that up. Here it is. Okay, so I've got a client ID. Plug that in. I got a tenant ID. Plug that in. And then I got a secret, which you won't be able to see because it's a secret. Plug that one in too. All right. And then I want to share all these service connections. So these service connections are what talks from Azure DevOps pipelines into Dataverse. So I want my pipelines to be able to access information in Dataverse to be able to export solutions, import solutions, etc. We'll click share with all pipelines. That looks good. Click next. It's going to go ahead and create those in Azure DevOps for me. And then the last thing is to just create the generic export, import, delete pipelines. So generic pipelines being, I want to export a solution, or I want to import a solution from source control, or I want to delete an unmanaged solution in my app or in my development environment, and I want to delete all the components associated with that. And we kind of talked through that a little bit last week. So I'm going to create those. It went ahead and did that for me, and now I've got a new project, right? I've got a Azure DevOps project. If I go to dev.azure.com, I can actually see that project. It's called Zero to Hero. There it is. I've got pipelines underneath of here. If I go to all, I can see my delete, export, import. I can see the sync pipeline. The sync pipeline is responsible for syncing the templates in our repository to this project. So if I go back to Zero to Hero and I look at the repos, I've actually got two repository here. I have the default one, which is where all my solutions will be source controlled, and then I've got the CoE ALM accelerator templates, and these were pulled directly from our repo that basically does all of the hard work behind the scenes on exporting, importing, deleting, deploying, etc. And I think I'm going to stop there. So I think we do want to have time for questions, but I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and I'll bring up the slides again. Maybe we can talk a little bit about extending the accelerator. You can extend the pipelines. There's some ability to extend the pipelines. It's all documented. And again, there's a QR code if you want to look at how you can extend the pipelines for your specific needs in your organization. Same warnings as the CoE starter kit. Apps, cloud flows, custom connectors can't be merged. So recommend not updating those unless you create a copy and then kind of take it on yourself to maintain that. And then this was a slide that is kind of cross-cutting between CoE starter kit and ALM accelerator. We do everything out in the open. It's in GitHub. If you have an issue, if you have a question, if you want to contact either me or Manuela, the best place to do that is in GitHub. It's not by email, it's not by Twitter or LinkedIn, because she and I and the rest of the team are in GitHub every day. That's where we do our work. And that's how we prioritize things. That's where we put our project backlogs on. So absolutely reach out to us with questions or issues. And we prioritize on a monthly basis. Obviously, we release on a monthly basis. Things shift on a monthly basis, but we do have our milestones out there that say what we're planning to do in the next 3 months. So you can always go there to check that out. And then as far as support, same thing, GitHub, right? And GitHub is somewhat anonymous in that you can have your own username. I don't know if you are a premier customer or just somebody kicking the tires. I don't really care. We want to answer all of the questions that come into GitHub, regardless of who the person who's asking the question is, and that's kind of nice, right? And that's how an open source project should work. And we get a lot of contributions from people, be it issues, be it PRs, be it just discussions, etc. It's been a really good experience to actually work in an open source Power Platform project, and I think we're one of the first to actually do that, on this scale. So, with that, I will stop talking, and I'll open it up for questions.
All right, Mike, this is incredible. I have a question, but it relates more to last week's session than it does this one. The person asked the question of there were some governance components that listed out inactive assets or assets that have not been used in the last 90 days. So the question was around if that particular set or time frame can be configurable. Instead of 90 days, maybe some organizations consider it inactive in the next 30 days without use. Is that configurable? Should they pursue?
Yes. Yeah. A lot of for a lot of those settings, we provide a default value, but that can be configured. So for the inactive, actually, the default value is 6 months, but it absolutely can be changed to a year or 3 months, depending on what the organization wants. So I'll add those. I don't know if that person is on the call today, but I'll add the links for how to configure that into the chat. And we've got a video specific about the inactivity components that talks about the configuration as well.
Perfect. All right, we'll point that person to that direction if he's not here. Yeah, I don't think he's here today. But yeah, that was the one question I had. I mean, I have one comment around this ALM kit. This is awesome, Mike. I mean, a lot of we did previous sessions on pipeline, and then we probably lost half of the the attendees during the sessions because of the effort that it takes to go through and set it up all by hand. So this is amazing, and I really like the wizards and everything is in place. It's clear what it's requesting. So kudos to you and team for putting this together. It's much appreciated.
Yep. Yeah. And that's the same feedback we've gotten, right? Like, and it is difficult to get started with, and that's the CoE starter kit, ALM accelerator. Like, we named them on purpose that way. Is like, this will help your organization get started quicker down that path, right? Like, that's our goal. Like, it's not a complete, it's not a product feature, it's not a complete solution necessarily for every customer, but we've tried to make it provide the ability for it to cater to most customers. But it is, until it's available in the product itself, this is a good place to start for sure.
Yep. Anybody else has questions, comments, anything that you'd like to see, maybe for us to provide more material for you to do some studies on your own? Let me know. Let me see if there's anything on the chat. I don't see
a quick
any.
question.
Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So at the Power Platform conference, I think there was a thing about the fact that these pipelines will now sort of be sort of native in the in the Maker environment, right? Now, would that replace this kit? I mean, when that comes through, would that replace or would that sort of supplement? How would that work?
That's a great question. That is, yes, there is Power Pipelines coming. Power Pipelines is more of a sort of the ability to push a solution to a downstream environment. Doesn't include source control. Our goal as the ALM accelerator team is to be a complement to Power Pipelines going forward. And I think I hinted at that earlier, whereby the reason that we've disconnected the app from our pipelines is at some point we want to get to a place where Power Pipelines is the front end of our pipelines. And we have been working with the product team on how we hook into Power Pipelines using our pipelines, or Azure DevOps pipelines, to effectively be a complement to Power Pipelines. So yes, we've been working with that team very closely, and the goal is ultimately to put ourselves out of business, and to be honest, because we don't want to maintain this thing forever. We want it to be in the platform, but there's going to be some gaps in the functionality that we have and what comes out in Power Pipelines initially. So hopefully we can be a complement and sort of add to that through hooks in the Power Pipelines. It was a good question, Doug.
Great, thanks.
Anybody else?
Power lines.
All right, we are 2 minutes over. Yeah, we should do a comedy skit on some of these names. I was messing with what's his name, Scott Duro, when the comment bar automation came out. That we should call it Power Bar, and then now we have Power Pipeline. Maybe we call it Power Lines. I don't know.
Yeah, I like that.
Anyhow, Mike, Manuela, thank you so much for your participation. If I get any additional questions and if stuff that I can't answer, I'll reach out to you. But really, really appreciate you connecting today and preparing this material for us. Thank you so much. Have a good Thursday, and have a good Thursday, everybody, and weekend.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.